Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirikoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my hidden gems for Week 9 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Now, after the snap that occurred on Thursday Night Football, many of us began to realize that not only did Mike White Lightning, Michael Carter, and Jamison Crowder disappear from our fantasy football lineups, but many other prospects were affected by the snap as they went from healthy, questionable, to out, and are perhaps some of them even on the injured reserve going into Week 9. Now, in order to go ahead and revamp and get our fantasy football lineups back to its prominence and help us win in our Week 9 matchups, in order to, of course, get to the final goal of winning a 2021 fantasy football championship, we will be finding sleepers across the entire universe, the timelines, and different planets with the help of Underdog Fantasy. Of course, we're going to be finding players that are currently being started in less than 50% of leagues, players that perhaps you may not think that should start this upcoming week, but I'm going to give you guys my thought process and opinions as to why I will be firing them up in their respective matchups, and of course, trying to take every advantage I possibly can. We'll talk about players that, of course, at times are not looked as studs. I mean, a lot of these players are not started for a reason because they're not getting ample opportunity or they're perhaps in bad matchups, but I want to kind of give you guys my thought process, and of course, after we go ahead and talk about our 6 hidden gems and collect those stones, completing the fantasy football gauntlet, we'll go ahead and we'll put together some sleeper lineups via Underdog Fantasy, where I'll go ahead and, of course, put together some pick'em slips and give you guys a little bit of an idea as to how I'm going to approach that this upcoming weekend. If you guys haven't checked out Underdog Fantasy, of course, they're helping us out today in order to collect the 6 hidden gems. If you sign up today using promo code Andrew, Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. You drop $100, they're going to give you $100 to start off. Again, whether it is the weekly matchups, the Sunday Battle Royales, whether it's multiple sports, the NFL, NBA, NHL, fantasy football, fantasy sports in general is always fun, and we can never get enough of it. But either way, if you want to go ahead, play fantasy football the Underdog way, check out Underdog Fantasy. Down in the description of the video, we have the promo code there and the link to check them out if you guys are interested. All right, let's get into this, shall we? We're talking about hidden gems across the entire multiverse, and we're going to begin with Jeremy McNichols as the Power Stone. And as we've progressed throughout the week, we've seen a couple different changes to this backfield. Of course, Derrick Henry on Monday out for 6 to 10 weeks. Then we saw Adrian Peterson get signed. Then we, of course, just yesterday saw D'Onta Foreman get signed and promoted to the active roster. There is going to be an amalgamation of just running backs every single down, perhaps changing. But I think the most valuable of the three is definitely going to be Jeremy McNichols, not only because he is the most familiar with this backfield, and as a guy between weeks 1 through 4 was honestly playing a pretty decent amount. I mean, from weeks 1 through 4 of this season, he was playing 32% of the offensive snaps when we had Derrick Henry taking over the league. On top of that, I mean, throughout those games, he's been a PPR receiving back. And he's a guy that, even in his best game this season against the New York Jets, 12 targets, 8 receptions, 74 receiving yards, great overall performance. Now, as we progress, the question is, what is he going to potentially provide for us with Derrick Henry no longer in the backfield? And in my opinion, there's going to be a lot for him to offer, mainly because this team, in comparison to 2020, is throwing the ball to their respective running backs far more than they had in the past. Specifically, this season alone already, in the 8 games that the Tennessee Titans have played, they've targeted their running backs 49 times, that have led to 41 receptions, 368 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. That's about 6 targets per game. Now, if in fact this offense is going to get themselves in a scenario where, of course, they're not able to effectively run the ball like they had 29 times per game with Derrick Henry, and they're, of course, forced to sit in the 3rd and long situations and dump the ball off to their checkdowns like a Jeremy McNichols, then he is going to dominate in the receiving game. I think there's a lot of potential to be had here. He's currently being started in 47% of leagues, which, of course, half of us have a mind to potentially, fire him up and send him out there. And perhaps maybe you're not as desperate to go ahead and find a Jeremy McNichols, but in my opinion, the hardest choices require the strongest of wills. And I think on Sunday Night Football against the Los Angeles Rams, against the defensive line like Aaron Donald, and of course you have Von Miller joining that team, it is going to be extremely difficult to run the ball on them. So why not go ahead, sit in the shotgun, use Jeremy McNichols as a 3rd down back, and continue to feed him the ball, especially in a game in which they may be down in a negative game script, having to be forced to throw the ball with, of course, Julio Jones, and now A.J. Brown dealing with a little bit of an injury. I think Jeremy McNichols may be the only option to help Ryan Tannehill, and that is why he is our Power Stone for this week. We move on to our 2nd hidden gem. We talk about Van Jefferson in the same matchup on Sunday Night Football. We have Van Jefferson taking on the Tennessee Titans. As of this current moment in time, I talk about it every single week. The Tennessee Titans are giving up the most points to opposing wide receivers thus far this season on average in a half PPR scoring format. So besides being the easiest matchup at the position, and besides being the number 13 overall wide receiver in the last 2 weeks of fantasy football, that's right, Van Jefferson has been a great option, scoring 12.3 fantasy points and 10.3 fantasy points. Now you may be wondering, why is he just all of a sudden come along? Well, it's mainly because he's playing far more than he typically was earlier on in the season. With Deshaun Jackson being cut, and of course Tutu Atwell going down with the season-ending injury, we've of course in the last 2 weeks seen, Van Jefferson play 94% and 84% of the offensive snaps. If you're going to go ahead and get those kind of opportunities in an offense that is as potent as the Los Angeles Rams, scoring over 30 points per game as an offense, I think there's a great opportunity for a player like Van Jefferson in an incredible matchup, who is only being started in 21% of leagues and probably widely available in your respective league, to have themselves great overall production. Now, besides being the number 13 overall wide receiver in the last 2 weeks in a half PPR scoring format, Cooper Kupp's been the number 1 and Robert Woods has been the number 9. There is a lot of productivity for this offense, and nobody's being, shortcutted. It's not, Van Jefferson isn't getting opportunity because one of these other options are disappearing. It's actually quite the opposite. Everyone is benefiting because of Matthew Stafford and how great he has been in terms of an impact on this offense. But either way, Van Jefferson is our space zone for this week, and of course, the sky's the limit for him. I expect that to be the case as he catches a couple deep balls this upcoming week. Moving on to Kadarius Toney. This is a player that we've already talked about this year as a hidden gem, but as I was kind of scrolling through the list of players, I looked and I saw Kadarius Toney is currently only being started in 38% of leagues. And you may be wondering, okay, Andrew, isn't that a fair amount? Well, to be honest, it's not. Let's think about the reality of the situation. That's exactly what Kadarius Toney is this week. He's the ether. He is the reality stone. And the reality of the situation for the New York Giants is that Sterling Shepard is going to be out once again with a hamstring injury, and Dante Pettis is going to be out this upcoming week. And how did that potentially impact, the potential upside of Kadarius Toney? Well, to be honest, Sterling Shepard this season already has played 72.5% of his offensive snaps from the slot position, where of course that is where Kadarius Toney plays his majority of his snaps. Now also, Dante Pettis against the Carolina Panthers a couple weeks back, when of course Sterling Shepard and Kadarius Toney were both injured, Pettis played 85% of his snaps in that one game against the Carolina Panthers from the slot position. These are two wide receivers that can play the slot position, that are immediate competitors of targets and opportunities from Kadarius Toney, with them both potentially being out. Kenny Galladay on the outside, and of course the defense for the Las Vegas Raiders focusing on him, perhaps the tight end position. Kadarius Toney will dominate the middle of the field and be able to exploit the defense once again. And earlier this season, when he's been able to, of course, be given ample opportunity, 9 targets, 6 catches, 78 yards for 10.9 fantasy points, 13 targets, 10 catches, 189, 24.6 fantasy points. When he is healthy, Kadarius Toney is an incredible prospect, and I think this week he's going to ball out. Moving on to our next hidden gem, we have Jarvis Landry of the Cleveland Browns. And, the Soul Stone, it requires a sacrifice. We all know this. And this upcoming week, what did it cost? Of course, Odell Beckham Jr. yesterday was released from the Cleveland Browns. He went as far as to not even take his guaranteed money from the organization. He said, you know what? I want out so badly, you don't even have to give me my guaranteed money. Just let me go. And he was released. And as we all know, this is a former teammate of Jarvis Landry from LSU. They are great friends, if not best friends. And this is going to hurt. But ultimately, the sacrifice that has been made by Odell Beckham Jr. is going to potentially blossom the opportunities that Jarvis Landry is going to be given, and of course his potential upside in fantasy. Now, in the last couple weeks, of course, coming back from his injury, he has had a great amount of targets with Baker Mayfield under center. In fact, he has seen 8 targets for 5 receptions and 10 targets for 5 receptions. 18 targets in the last 2 weeks is incredible numbers, and I think it's only going to scale upward as, of course, yes, you have Donovan Peoples-Jones, Rashard Higgins in this offense, and yes, they may be guys that could end up scoring touchdowns and finding value, but they are not the go-to of this offense. There's a reason why Odell Beckham left, is because he wasn't getting targets, and the ball is typically going in the direction of Jarvis Landry on a weekly basis. Going against the Cincinnati Bengals, I think there's a lot of potential for upside here, specifically considering, going back to just last week, Jamison Crowder, 8 catches on 9 targets for 84 yards. Braxton Berrios scored a touchdown from the slot position. There's a lot of potential for slot receivers against the Cincinnati Bengals, who had an extremely difficult time covering backs and slot receivers last week against the New York Jets. I think, of course, Cleveland Browns are going to diagnose this via tape and take advantage of it via Jarvis Landry, their number 1 receiving threat. All right, we'll go ahead and move on and find Jeff Wilson Jr. as this week's time stone. Now, as we all know, dreaded run from it, destiny arrives all the same. But the question remains whether or not Jeff Wilson Jr. is even going to be active this week. The reason why I wanted to mention Jeff Wilson Jr. is a couple of, quotes that I've heard and the determining factors that give me some confidence. As of this week, Elijah Mitchell has been limited all week with a rib injury. According to the team, he is a truly questionable player and he may not even dress and go. If in fact they activate Jeff Wilson Jr. from the PUP return list, physically unable to perform, but he has a period of time in which he can, of course, return. But he's been practicing this week, and even the 49ers general manager has said, John Lynch said, there's a very good chance that Jeff Wilson Jr. could be activated this week from the PUP list in order to play in Week 9 against the Arizona Cardinals. And if that's going to be the case, and we, of course, are going to see a limited Elijah Mitchell because he is injured, well, Jeff Wilson Jr. has been on many of our IRs and our benches for a reason over the last month plus. It's mainly because he is a very impactful running back. Let's talk about not only what his contributions have been, but what the 49ers offense kind of provides, especially to running backs. This season already, the 49ers are 12th in the National Football League in total rushing yards per game. They're also 7th in the National Football League in rushing touchdowns. Now, overall, that's fantastic. We'll take that. Now, as we continue to expand on the 49ers, we'll go back to the 2020 season to see what exactly Jeff Wilson Jr. was capable of. From weeks 14 through 17, Jeff Wilson Jr. was the number 5 overall running back in fantasy, and for many of us was a league-winning running back. In week 16, the championship week, had himself a 20-plus point performance. For those of you who played in week 17 championship, had himself a 20-point performance. In the last 4 weeks, he was averaging 17.52 half PPR fantasy points per game. He had scored 5 touchdowns in those 4 games and had himself 85 total opportunities. Now, if in fact we're going to see a scenario in which Elijah Mitchell is not going to play, he was in a non-contact jersey all week long, and he's not going to be able to go, well, they're not going to give Trey Sermon the opportunity. They're not going to give JaMychal Hasty the opportunity. By all means, the only time Kyle Juszczyk plays is if the running back position is decimated. Jeff Wilson Jr., who has been quoted by Kyle Shanahan to be in incredible shape, could be a potential start this week. He's currently being started in 0% of leagues, and that's mainly because we don't know if he's even going to play. If he doesn't play, so be it. He's a wash. But if he ends up being activated because Elijah Mitchell is not going to play, could be an extremely high valuable prospect. Moving on to our final hidden gem, we have Tyrod Taylor, another player that is returning from the injured reserve. And the reason why I wanted to mention Tyrod Taylor is because not only has Tyrod Taylor been the most unlucky quarterback. When he played in Cleveland with Baker Mayfield there as a rookie, concussion in that Thursday night game against the Jets, of course, exited and it was all over. He never played again. Last season with Justin Herbert behind him, he took a golf tee to the lungs and just got completely thrown out of that game. And then it was history as Justin Herbert ran that team, into a pretty good, position. And then this year, after having an incredible start, in week 1 against the Jacksonville Jaguars, 291 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 40 rushing yards for 23.64 fantasy points. And in 1.5 quarters against the Cleveland Browns, was able to put up 16.5 fantasy points with himself getting a rushing touchdown, a passing touchdown, and all of 140 all-purpose yards. I look at Tyrod Taylor and I think to myself, cursed with knowledge, he plays against the Miami Dolphins defense that has become one of the worst in the National Football League. In comparison to last year, nobody wanted to mess with the Miami Dolphins defense. But this year, a lot of quarterbacks have taken advantage of the matchup. Going back to Derek Carr, 386 yards, 2 touchdowns. Wentz, 228, 2 touchdowns. Brady, 411, 5 touchdowns. Matt Ryan, 336 and 2. Josh Allen this last week, 249 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, all with 55 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown in that game. Though the Buffalo Bills started slow, they eventually finished strong. And I think there's a very good chance this is a bit of a shootout between these two respective teams. Tyrod Taylor has a lot of value, especially as a mobile quarterback in a 4-point per passing touchdown league. His baseline floor, because of the rushing expectations that we have, is going to continue to rise. I think he's a great option. Cursed with knowledge, Tyrod Taylor finishes our hidden gems as the Mind Stone. Now that we've collected our 6 hidden gems, before we go ahead and place them into the fantasy gauntlet, let's go ahead and let's travel to underdogfantasy.com and let's talk about some pick'em slips that I'm going to be going after this upcoming week. Let's check that out right now. All right, so as you can see here, we are at underdogfantasy.com, and I just want to, of course, talk about the pick'ems again. Like, let's say, for example, Damian Harris. He's currently sitting this weekend at 72.5 rushing yards. If, in fact, you pick over, you're expecting him to have 73 yards or more. If you pick under, you're expecting him to have 72 yards rushing or less. Now, if, in fact, you're able to select and accurately pick over-under on 5 different prospects, you can 20 times your money. So there's a lot of potential to be had here, but it's a matter of whether or not you can get a clean lineup together. I'm going to go ahead and, of course, put together some lineups. Obviously, I try to look for, the 2 pairs or the 3 pairs, because getting 5 is extremely difficult. But hey, if you guys are out there and you've got some locks, let me know. Help me out. I feel like I've been the Grim Reaper, or perhaps even the kiss of death in the last couple weeks. I'll pick 4 players, and literally, though they all look beautiful, they will all go the completely opposite direction. So whether you're trailing or fading, understand I have been completely just off base as of late. So if you got some picks, you got some, perhaps locks, tweet it at me, send a screenshot, or go to the Discord server. It's down in the description of the video if you want to join. Of course, go to the Underdog section, post that screenshot. Let me know what you guys are going after. And if you help me out in that regard, I'll go ahead. If you got a question for this weekend's lineups, you got a flex question, let me know. I'll answer your flex question. But help your boy out. Of course, give me some locks. So if you'd like to do that, go ahead and send that in my direction. Of course, guys, if you haven't checked out Underdog Fantasy, you can go down to the description of the video, click on the link, and use promo code Andrew with your first deposit. Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. Again, extremely generous of them. All right, so let's talk about this, shall we? I've got a couple props in mind. First and foremost, we always want to put together the hidden gems props. So let's go ahead, let's grab Tyrod Taylor, who we just mentioned as this week's potential Mindstone. Where is Mr. Tyrod Taylor this week? All right, 228.5 passing yards. All right, we're going to take the over. This is going to be a little bit of a shootout. We also have Mr. Jarvis Landry. Where did Jarvis go? We'll take over 57.5, and then we're looking for Kadarius Toney, because the other players that we mentioned either aren't on the list, which is Jeff Wilson, because he hasn't even been activated yet, or are playing in the Sunday night game, which has a different slate. So we're going to go ahead and take these 3 players. We're going to put it to the test. We're going to fire this up with a $5 bid, try to make it into 30. If you guys are, looking to make it even more and you feel more confident about it, you can. If you want to go ahead, you know what I probably should be doing? In all honesty, I should probably be going under on all 3 of these, because that's probably what's going to happen. But hey, if you guys want to cash in on that, go under on all 3 of them. I'm going to send this through, and then we'll move on to the next one. All right, so now that we've kind of covered the hidden gems basis, I like to do specific positions. Let's go tight end overs. So as I've kind of deciphered through this, and I thought to myself, well, there's a couple tight end spots here that I actually really like, as their numbers are, quite low in comparison to where they should be. Dalton Schultz, in my opinion, now that Blake Jarwin's going to the injured reserve, there is no one competing with targets with him. CeeDee Lamb's questionable. Amari Cooper's questionable. There's a lot of potential here. So Dalton Schultz, 44.5 yards, we'll take that. I also really like Jared Cook, 29.5 yards. This is one of the easiest matchups at the tight end position this season alone. Yes, he has been close to that number, but because of the matchup and how advantageous it is, he is very easily going to be on pace for surpassing just 30 receiving yards. And the final player in this regard that I wanted to go ahead and claim, I think if I'm not mistaken, is CJ Uzomah at 27.5 yards. I've talked about it earlier this week. CJ Uzomah has had a very great storied history against the Cleveland Browns. He has scored a touchdown in, I think, each of the last 3 games that he played against them. He's found a lot of success. The only reason he didn't play them more than once last season was because, of course, the season-ending injury he sustained. But either way, these are the 3 tight end plays that I like. Let's go ahead. Let's fire these suckers up, and let's see what happens with them. Now that we've gone ahead and done our tight ends, I typically don't really like to play over-under on interceptions. There are some good interception props here. Like, if I'm not mistaken, we have Dak Prescott with over-under 0.5. We also have Jalen Hurts, and we have Justin Herbert. If you're interested in something like that, and you're trying to predict whether a player is going to throw an interception, maybe all of them do, maybe none of them do, that's something to look at. But I like also touchdowns. Now, specifically Teddy Bridgewater, 1.5 touchdowns. That scares me by all means, because Teddy Bridgewater's burnt me on this list multiple times in the last couple weeks. But the game here between the Green Bay Packers and the Kansas City Chiefs kind of entices me. I like the idea of going over 0.5 rushing touchdowns for Aaron Jones, which means he's just going to score 1 rushing touchdown. And I like the idea of 0.5 receiving touchdowns from Tyreek Hill. This, in my opinion, yes, it's only 2 players, but I feel confident enough where I'll go ahead, double my overall bid, send it, see what we can do with it. Now, another one of these potential, buy-ins that I want to go ahead and, put together in terms of these pick'em slips are wide receiver overs. Now, as of the last couple weeks, some of these wide receivers have been a little bit inconsistent, but that's the wide receiver position as a whole. I really do love Marquise Hollywood Brown. His numbers, yes, inconsistent against the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers are a significantly better, secondary than the Indianapolis Colts, Cincinnati Bengals, and especially against the Minnesota Vikings, who will not have Patrick Peterson with another consecutive week. His over, I think it's an automatic smash, considering, of course, Lamar Jackson's been throwing the ball as much as he has in the last couple of weeks. That is an automatic over in my eyes. Now, the next player I wanted to go after, if I could find him, Jalen Waddle, 66.5 yards. This number has moved up in the last couple of days, mainly because, again, Jalen Waddle has seen 11 targets per game in each of the last 3 weeks. Devontae Parker is once again out. He's going to the injured reserve with a hamstring injury. Will Fuller is out, besides Mike Gesicki, who honestly might even be an over in his own right. Maybe I should have thrown him into the prior parlay. I think there's a very good chance Jalen Waddle surpasses this number. So between these two players, that's the 1-2 lock that I want to throw in there. Maybe I could throw Mike Gesicki in there, but we'll go ahead. We'll lock these two gentlemen in here. You know what? Let's just put it at 5. Let's not get crazy, okay? And we'll send that. All right, now we'll go ahead, scroll on down, and I want to find the very last pick'em slip that I want to put together here. And it's going to be an under. Typically, I don't like to root against players. I don't. I truly do not. But there was a couple things here that I did not like. First and foremost, DJ Moore. I know Sam Darnold's going to play this weekend because he's cleared the concussion protocol. But with that said, I still don't like the idea. I don't know what it is. I mean, his numbers, yeah, okay, they've been great. 73, but he's not really doing more than this. And is Sam Darnold going to be automatically fixed with Christian McCaffrey returning to the backfield? I don't think so. I feel like Bill Belichick wants to take away number one options. I feel like DJ Moore's an under. Now, the next under that I'm feeling, and it may be, concerning to you, but it really shouldn't be, is Devontae Adams on the under. He needs to go under basically 81 or less receiving yards. And to be honest, when I'm looking at his numbers, I'm thinking to myself, well, even with Aaron Rodgers, this guy's not able to, very easily surpass that number. With Jordan Love at the quarterback position, this could be even more difficult. So this is what I'm taking. That's another pair. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and throw a 3 extra legs onto this. Maybe go ahead and play some of the rivals games because you could put players up against one another. If you want to go ahead and check out some of the NBA overall picks here, there's a lot of them. I can assure you there's a lot of them. Whether it is you're trying to go after total points, rebound, assists combined, there's a lot of fun to be had here on Underdog Fantasy. We'll go ahead, put this final slip in for this weekend. And that is it. Again, if you guys have locks that you believe are great, tweet it at me. Go to the Discord server. Send a screenshot to me. And, of course, if you have a question, send it my way as well. Try to help me out, and I'll try to help you out as much as I possibly can. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Now that we've covered some hidden gems here on Underdog Fantasy, let's return and, of course, complete the fantasy gauntlet to snap our lineups back to what they used to be. Here we go. As you can see, we have completed the fantasy football gauntlet for this upcoming week 9 of the 2021 fantasy football season. I want to thank all of you for watching. If you guys have not yet already, subscribe to the channel, like today's video. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, like we do every Sunday, I'll be live streaming. Thank you, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.